Section 1 of the Conjure Woman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James K. White. Section 1 of the Conjure Woman by Charles Waddell Chesnutt. The Goophered Grapevine. Some years ago my wife was in poor health, and our family doctor, in whose skill and honesty I had implicit confidence, advised a change of climate. I shared, from an unprofessional standpoint, his opinion that the raw winds, the chill rains, and the violent changes of temperature that characterized the winters in the region of the Great Lakes tended to aggravate my wife's difficulty, and would undoubtedly shorten her life if she remained exposed to them. The doctor's advice was that we seek not a temporary place of sojourn, but a permanent residence in a warmer and more equable climate. I was engaged at the time in grape culture in northern Ohio, and as I liked the business and had given it much study, I decided to look for some other locality suitable for carrying it on. I thought of sunny France, of sleepy Spain, of Southern California, but there were objections to them all. It occurred to me that I might find what I wanted in some one of our own Southern States. It was a sufficient time after the war for conditions in the South to have become somewhat settled, and I was enough of a pioneer to start a new industry if I could not find a place where grape culture had been tried. I wrote to a cousin who had gone into the turpentine business in central North Carolina. He assured me, in response to my inquiries, that no better place could be found in the South than the State and neighborhood where he lived. The climate was perfect for health, and, in conjunction with the soil, ideal for grape culture. Labor was cheap, and land could be bought for a mere song. He gave us a cordial invitation to come and visit him while he looked into the matter. We accepted the invitation, and after several days of leisurely travel, the last 100 miles of which were up a river on a sidewheel steamer, we reached our destination, a quaint old town which I shall call Patesville, because, for one reason, that is not its name. There was a red brick market house in the public square, with a tall tower, which held a four-faced clock that struck the hours, and from which there pealed out a curfew at 9 o'clock. There were 2 or 3 hotels, a court-house, a jail, stores, offices, and all the appurtenances of a county seat and a commercial emporium. For while Patesville numbered only 4,000 or 5,000 inhabitants, of all shades of complexion, it was one of the principal towns in North Carolina, and had a considerable trade in cotton and naval stores. This business activity was not immediately apparent to my unaccustomed eyes. Indeed, when I first saw the town, there brooded over it a calm that seemed almost sabbatic in its restfulness, though I learned later on that underneath its somnolent exterior the deeper currents of life, love and hatred, joy and despair, ambition and avarice, faith and friendship, flowed not less steadily than in livelier latitudes. We found the weather delightful at that season, the end of summer, and were hospitably entertained. Our host was a man of means, and evidently regarded our visit as a pleasure, and we were therefore correspondingly at our ease, and in a position to act with the coolness of judgment desirable in making so radical a change in our lives. My cousin placed a horse and buggy at our disposal, and himself acted as our guide until I became somewhat familiar with the country. I found that grape culture, while it had never been carried on to any great extent, was not entirely unknown in the neighborhood. Several planters thereabouts had attempted it on a commercial scale in former years, with greater or less success. But, like most Southern industries, it had felt the blight of war and had fallen into desuetude. I went several times to look at a place that I thought might suit me. It was a plantation of considerable extent that had formerly belonged to a wealthy man by the name of McAdoo. The estate had been for years involved in litigation between disputing heirs, during which period shiftless cultivation had well nigh exhausted the soil. There had been a vineyard of some extent on the place, but it had not been attended to since the war, and had lapsed into utter neglect. The vines, here partly supported by decayed and broken down trellises, were twining themselves among the branches of the slender saplings which had sprung up among them, grew in wild and unpruned luxuriance, and the few scattered grapes they bore were the undisputed prey of the first comer. The site was admirably adapted to grape raising. The soil, with a little attention, could not have been better, and with the native grape, the luscious scuppernong, as my main reliance in the beginning, I felt sure that I could introduce and cultivate successfully a number of other varieties. One day I went over with my wife to show her the place. We drove out of the town over a long wooden bridge that spanned a spreading mill pond, past the long whitewashed fence surrounding the county fair ground, and struck into a road so sandy that the horses' feet sank to the fetlocks. Our route lay partly uphill and partly down, for we were in the Sandhill County. We drove past cultivated farms, and then by abandoned fields grown up in scrub oak and short-leaved pine, and once or twice through the solemn aisles of the virgin forest, where the tall pines, well nigh meeting over the narrow road, shut out the sun, and wrapped us in cloistral solitude. Once, at a cross roads, I was in doubt as to the turn to take, and we sat there waiting 10 minutes. We had already caught some of the native infection of the restlessness for some human being to come along who could direct us on our way. At length a little negro girl appeared, walking straight as an arrow, with a piggin full of water on her head. After a little patient investigation, necessary to overcome the child's shyness, we learned what we wished to know, and at the end of about 5 miles from the town reached our destination. We drove between a pair of decayed gate posts, the gate itself had long since disappeared, and up a straight sandy lane between 2 lines of rotting rail fence, partly concealed by jimson weeds and briers, to the open space where a dwelling house had once stood, evidently a spacious mansion, if we might judge from the ruined chimneys that were still standing, and the brick pillars on which the sills rested. The house itself, we had been informed, had fallen a victim to the fortunes of war. We alighted from the buggy, walked about the yard for a while, and then wandered off into the adjoining vineyard. Upon Annie's complaining of weariness, I led the way back to the yard, where a pine log, lying under a spreading elm, afforded a shady though somewhat hard seat. One end of the log was already occupied by a venerable looking colored man. He held on his knees a hat full of grapes, over which he was smacking his lips with great gusto, and a pile of grape skins near him indicated that the performance was no new thing. We approached him at an angle from the rear, and were close to him before he perceived us. He respectfully rose as we drew near, and was moving away, when I begged him to keep his seat. "Don't let us disturb you," I said. "There is plenty of room for us all." He resumed his seat with somewhat of embarrassment. While he had been standing, I had observed that he was a tall man, and, though slightly bowed by the weight of years, apparently quite vigorous. He was not entirely black, and this fact, together with the quality of his hair, which was about 6 inches long and very bushy, except on the top of his head, where he was quite bald, suggested a slight strain of other than negro blood. There was a shrewdness in his eyes, too, which was not altogether African, and which, as we afterwards learned from experience, was indicative of a corresponding shrewdness in his character. He went on eating the grapes, but did not seem to enjoy himself quite so well as he had apparently done before he became aware of our presence. "Do you live around here?" I asked, anxious to put him at his ease. "Yas, suh. I lives ders ober yonder, behind de next sand hill, on de Lumberton plank road." "Do you know anything about the time when this vineyard was cultivated?" "Lawd bless you, suh, I knows all about it. Dey ain' na'er a man in dis settlement w'at won't tell you ole Julius McAdoo wuz bawn en raise' on dis yer same plantation. Is you de Norv'n gemman w'at's gwine ter buy de ole vimya'd?" "I am looking at it," I replied, "but I don't know that I shall care to buy unless I can be reasonably sure of making something out of it." "Well, suh, you is a stranger to me, en I is a stranger to you, en we is bofe strangers to one anudder, but ef I 'uz in yo' place I wouldn' buy dis vimya'd." "Why not?" I asked. "Well, I don't know whether you believes in conjurin' er not. Some er de w'ite folks don't, er says dey don't. But de trufe er de matter is dat dis yer ole vimya'd is goophered." "Is what?" I asked, not grasping the meaning of this unfamiliar word. "Is goophered, conjured, bewitch'." He imparted this information with such solemn earnestness, and with such an air of confidential mystery, that I felt somewhat interested, while Annie was evidently much impressed, and drew closer to me. "How do you know it is bewitched?" I asked. "I wouldn' 'spec' fer you ter b'liebe me 'less you know all 'bout de fac's, but ef you en young miss dere don't min' listenin' to a' ole nigger run on a minute er two w'ile you're restin', I kin 'splain to you how it all happen'." We assured him that we would be glad to hear how it all happened, and he began to tell us. At first the current of his memory, or imagination, seemed somewhat sluggish, but as his embarrassment wore off, his language flowed more freely, and the story acquired perspective and coherence. As he became more and more absorbed in the narrative, his eyes assumed a dreamy expression, and he seemed to lose sight of his auditors, and to be living over again in monologue his life on the old plantation. "Ole Mars Dugal' McAdoo," he began, "bought dis place long many year befo' de wah, en I remember well w'en he sot out all dis yer part er de plantation in de scuppernon's. De vimes growed monst'us fas', en Mars Dugal' made 1,000 gallon er scuppernon wine eve'y year. Now ef dey's anything a nigger lub, nex' ter 'possum en chicken en watermillions, it's scuppernon's. Dey ain' nuffin dat kin stan' up sidin' de scuppernon fer sweetness. Sugar ain' a circumstance to scuppernon. W'en de season is nigh 'bout ober, en de grapes begin ter swivel up des a little wid de wrinkles er ole age, w'en de skin gits sof' en brown, den de scuppernon make you smack yo' lip en roll yo' eye en wush fer mo'. So I reckon it ain't very 'stonishin' dat niggers lubs scuppernon. Dey wuz a sight er niggers in de neighborhood er de vimya'd. Dey wuz ole Mars Henry Braboy's niggers, en ole Mars Jeems McLean's niggers, en Mars Dugal's own niggers. Den dey wuz a settlement er free niggers en po' buckras down by de Wim'l'ton Road, en Mars Dugal's had de only vimya'd in de neighborhood. I reckon it ain't so much nowadays, but befo' de wah, in slab'ry times, a nigger didn' min' goin' 5 er 10 mile in de night w'en dey wuz somethin' good to eat at de udder een'. So atter a w'ile Mars Dugal' begun ter miss his scuppernon'. Co'se he 'cused de niggers er it, but dey all denied it ter de las'. Mars Dugal' sot spring guns en steel traps, en he en de oberseah sot up nights once er twice, 'tel one night Mars Dugal', he's a monst'us keerless man, got his leg shot full er cow peas, but somehow er nudder dey couldn' neber ketch none er de niggers. I don't know how it happen', but it happen' des like I tell you, en de grapes kep' on a goin' des de same. But bimeby ole Mars Dugal' fix up a plan ter stop it. Dey wuz a Conjure Woman livin' down 'mongs' de free niggers on de Wim'l'ton Road, en all de darkies from Rockfish ter Beaver Crick wuz feared er her. She could work de mos' powerfulest kin' er goopher, could make people hab fits, rheumatiz, make 'em des dwindle away en die, en dey say she went out ridin' de niggers at night, fer she wuz a witch 'sides bein' a Conjure Woman. Mars Dugal' hearn 'bout Aun' Peggy's doin's, and began to reflect whether or no he couldn't get her to help him keep the niggers off in the grapevines. One day, in the spring of the year, old Miss pack up a basket of chicken and pound cake and a bottle of scuppernong wine, and Mars Dugal tuck it in his buggy and drive over to Aunt Peggy's cabin. He took the basket in and had a long talk with Aunt Peggy. The next day, Aunt Peggy come up to the vineyard. The niggers seed her slipping round, and they soon found out what she was doing there. Mars Dugal had hired her to goofer the grapevines. She santered round amongst the vines and took a leaf from this one, and a grape hole from that one, and a grape seed from another one, and then a little twig from here, and a little pinch of dirt from there, and put it all in a big black bottle, with a snake's tooth and a speckled hen's gall and some hairs from a black cat's tail, and then filled the bottle with scuppernong wine. When she got the goofer all ready and fixed, she took and went out in the woods and buried it under the root of a red oak tree, and then come back and told one of the niggers she done goofered the grapevines. And every nigger what eat them grapes would be sure to die inside 12 months. After that, the niggers let the scuppernongs alone, and Mars Dugal didn't have no occasion to find no more fault. And the season was most gone when a strange gentleman stopped at the plantation one night to see Mars Dugal on some business. And his coachman, seeing the scuppernongs growing so nice and sweet, slipped round behind the smokehouse and ate all the scuppernongs he could hold. Nobody didn't notice it at the time, but that night, on the way home, the gentleman's hoss runned away and killed the coachman. When we heard the news, Aunt Lucy, the cook, she up and say she see the strange nigger eating of the scuppernongs behind the smokehouse, and then we knowed the goofer had been a-working. Then one of the nigger childrens runned away from the quarters one day and got in the scuppernongs and died the next week. White folks say he died of the fever, but the niggers knowed it was the goofer. So you can be sure the darkies didn't have much to do with them scuppernong vines. When the scuppernong season was over for that year, Mars Dugal found he had made 1,500 gallons of wine, and one of the niggers heard him laughing with the overseer fit to kill, and saying them 1,500 gallons of wine was monstrous good interest on the $10 he laid out on the vineyard. So I allows he paid Aunt Peggy $10 for the goofer the grapevines. The goofer didn't work no more till the next summer, when long towards the middle of the season one of the field hands died. And as that let Mars Dugal short of hands, he went off to town for to buy another. He fetched a new nigger home with him. He was a old nigger, the cutter of a ginger cake, and bald as a hoss apple on the top of his head. He was a pert old nigger, though. He could do a big day's work. Now, it happened that one of the niggers on the next plantation, one of old Mars Henry Brayboy's niggers, had run away the day before and took to the swamp, and old Mars Dugal and some of the other neighbor white folks had gone out with the guns and the dogs for to help 'em hunt for the nigger. And the hands on our own plantation was all so flusterated that we forgot to tell the new hand about the goofer on the scuppernong vines, 'cause he smelled the grapes and see the vines, and at the dark the first thing he done was to slip off to the grapevines 'thout saying nuffin to nobody. Next morning he told some of the niggers about the fine bait of scuppernong he et the night before. When they told him about the goofer on the grapevines, he is that terrified that he turned pale and looked just like he going to die right in his tracks. The overseer come up and asked what is the matter, and when they told him Henry been eating of the scuppernongs, and he got goofer on him, he gin Henry a big drink of whiskey, and 'lowed that the next rainy day he'd take him over to Aunt Peggy's, and see if she wouldn't take the goofer off'n him, seeing as he didn't know nuffin 'bout it till he done ate the grapes. Sho' nuff it rained the next day, and the overseer went over to Aunt Peggy's with Henry. And Aunt Peggy say that being as Henry didn't know 'bout the goofer, and ate the grapes in ignorance of the consequences, she reckoned she might be able for to take the goofer off'n him. So she fetch out a bottle with some conjure medicine in it, and pour some out in a gourd for Henry to drink. He managed to get it down. He say it tastes like whiskey with something bitter in it. She 'lowed dat to keep the goofer off'n him till next spring, but when the sap begin to rise in the grapevines, he had to come and see her again, and she tell him what else to do. Next spring, when the sap commenced to rise in the scuppernong vine, Henry took a ham one night. Where'd he get the ham, I don't know. Dey wa'n't no hams on the plantation 'cep'n what 'uz in the smoke house, but I never see Henry 'bout the smoke house. But as I was sayin', he took the ham over to Aunt Peggy's, and Aunt Peggy tole him dat when Mars Dugal' begin to prune the grapevines, he mus' go en take en scrape off de sap where it ooze out of de cuttins er de vines, en 'noint his bald head wid it, en ef he do dat once a year, de goopher wouldn't wuk agin him long ez he done it. En bein' ez he fotch her de ham, she fix it so he kin eat all de scuppernong he want. So Henry gnawed his head wid de sap out'n de big grapevine des halfway 'twix' de quarters en de big house, en de goopher nebber wuk agin him dat summer. But de beatenis' thing you eber see happen to Henry. Up ter dat time he wuz ez bald ez a sweetened tater, but des ez soon ez de young leaves begun ter come out on de grapevines, de hair begin ter grow out on Henry's head, en by de middle er de summer he had de biggest head er hair on de plantation. Befo' dat, Henry had tol'able good hair roun' de edges, but soon ez de young grapes begin ter come, Henry's hair begin ter curl all up in little balls des like his here reg'lar grappy hair, en by de time de grapes got ripe his head look des like a bunch er grapes. Combin' it didn't do no good. He wuk at it half de night wid a Jim Crow, en think he git it straighten' out, but in de mawnin' de grapes 'ud be dere des de same. So he gin it up, en tried to keep de grapes down by havin' his hair cut short. Footnote: a small card, resembling a currycomb in construction, and used by negroes in the rural districts instead of a comb. End footnote. But dat wa'n't de queerest thing about de goopher. When Henry come to de plantation, he was gittin' a little old en stiff in de joints. But dat summer he got des ez spry en lively ez any young nigger on de plantation. Fac', he got so biggity dat Mars Jackson, de oberseer, had to th'eaten to whip him ef he didn't stop cuttin' up his dittos en behave hisse'f. But de mos' cur'ous thing happen' in de fall, when de sap begin to go down in de grapevines. Fus', when de grapes is gethered, de knots begin to straighten out in Henry's hair, en when de leaves begin to fall, Henry's hair 'mence' to drap out. En when de vines is bare, Henry's head wuz baller dan it wuz in de spring, en he begin to git old en stiff in de joints ag'in, en pay no mo' 'tention to de gals durin' de whole winter. En nex' spring, when he rub de sap on ag'in, he got young ag'in, en so supple en lively dat none er de young niggers on de plantation couldn't jump, ner dance, ner hoe ez much cotton ez Henry. But in de fall er de year his grapes 'mence' to straighten out, en his joints to git stiff, en his hair drap off, en de rheumatic begin to wrestle wid him. Now ef you'd 'a' knowed ole Mars Dugal' McAdoo, you'd 'a' knowed dat it had to be a mighty rainy day when he couldn't fin' somethin' fer his niggers to do, en it had to be a mighty little hole he couldn't crawl th'ough, en had to be a monst'us cloudy night when a dollar git by him in de darkness. En w'en he see how Henry git young in de spring en ole in de fall, he 'lowed ter hisse'f ez how he could make mo' money out'n Henry dan by wukkin' him in de cotton fiel'. 'Long de nex' spring, atter de sap 'mence' to rise en Henry 'n'int his head en sta'ted fer ter git young en supple, Mars Dugal' up en tuk Henry ter town en sole 'im fer $1,500. 'Co'se de man w'at bought Henry didn' know nuffin 'bout de goopher, en Mars Dugal' didn' see no 'casion fer ter tell 'im. 'Long to'ds de fall, w'en de sap went down, Henry begin to git ole ag'in, same ez usual, en his noo marster begin to git sheered less'n he gwine lose his $1,500 nigger. He sent fer a mighty fine doctor, but de medicine didn't 'pear to do no good. De goopher had a good holt. Henry tole de doctor 'bout de goopher, but de doctor des laugh at him. One day in de winter Mars Dugal' went ter town, en was santerin' 'long de main street w'en who should he meet but Henry's noo marster. Dey said howdy, en Mars Dugal' ax' him ter hab a seegyar. En atter dey run on a w'ile 'bout de craps en de weather, Mars Dugal' ax' him sorter careless, like ez ef he des thought of it, "How you like de nigger I sole you las' spring?" Henry's marster shuck his head en knock de ashes off'n his seegyar. "'Spec' I made a bad bargain w'en I bought dat nigger. Henry done good wuk all de summer, but since the fall set in, he 'pears to be sorter pining away. Dey ain't nuffin particular de matter wid 'im, leastways de doctor say so, 'ceptin' a tech er de rheumatiz, but his hair is all fell out, en ef he don't pick up his strenk mighty soon, I 'spec' I'm gwine ter lose 'im.' Dey smoked on a w'ile, en bimeby ole Mars say, 'Well, a bargain's a bargain, but you en me is good frien's, en I don't wanter see you lose all de money you paid fer dat nigger, en ef w'at you say is so, en I ain't sputtin' it, he ain't wuff much now. I 'spec's you worked him too hard dis summer, er else de swamps down here don't agree wid de sand hill nigger. So you jes' lemme know, en ef he gits any wusser, I'll be willin' ter give you $500 fer 'im, en take my chances on his livin'.' Sho' 'nuff, w'en Henry begun ter draw up wid de rheumatiz, en it look like he gwine ter die fer sho', his noo marster sent fer Mars Dugal', en Mars Dugal' give 'im w'at he promise', en brung Henry home ag'in. He tuk good care of 'im durin' de winter, give 'im whiskey ter rub his rheumatiz en terbacker ter smoke, en all he want ter eat, 'ca'se a nigger w'at he could make $1,000 a year off'n didn't grow on every huckleberry bush. Nex' spring, w'en de sap rise en Henry's hair commenced ter sprout, Mars Dugal' sol' 'im ag'in down in Robeson County dis time, en he kep' dat sellin' business up fer 5 year er mo'. Henry nebber say nuffin 'bout de Goophered to his noo masters, 'ca'se he know he gwine ter be tuk good care of de nex' winter w'en Mars Dugal' buy 'im back, en Mars Dugal' made 'nuff money off'n Henry ter buy anudder plantation ober on Beaver Crick. But 'long 'bout de een' er dat 5 year, dey come a stranger ter stop at de plantation. De fus day he 'uz here, he went out wid Mars Dugal' en spent all de mornin' lookin' ober de vimya'd, en atter dinner dey spent all de evenin' playin' kyards. De niggers soon 'skivered dat he wuz a Yankee, en dat he come down ter Norf C'lina fer ter learn de w'ite folks how ter raise grapes en make wine. He promus' Mars Dugal' he could make de grapevimes bear twice ez many grapes, en dat de noo wine press he wuz a sellin' would make mo' d'n twice ez many gallons er wine. En ole Mars Dugal' des drunk it all in, des 'peared ter be bewitched by dat Yankee. W'en de darkies see dat Yankee runnin' roun' de vimya'd en diggin' under de grapevimes, dey shook deir heads, en 'lowed dat dey feared Mars Dugal' losin' his min'. Mars Dugal' had all de dirt dug away from under de roots er all de scuppernum vines, en let 'em stan' dat way fer a week er mo'. Den dat Yankee made de niggers fix up a mixtry er lime en ashes en manyo, en po' it roun' de roots er de grapevimes. Den he 'vise Mars Dugal' fer ter trim de vimes closet, en Mars Dugal' tuk en done eve'ything de Yankee tole 'im ter do. Durin' all dis time, min' you, dis yer Yankee wuz livin' off'n de fat er de lan' at de big house, en playin' kyards wid Mars Dugal' eve'y night, en dey say Mars Dugal' los' more'n $1,000 durin' de week dat Yankee wuz a ruinin' de grapevimes. W'en de sap rise nex' spring, ole Henry 'nointed his head ez usual, en his hair commenced ter grow des de same ez it done eve'y year. De scuppernum vimes growed monst'us fas', en de leaves wuz greener en thicker dan dey eber been durin' my remembrance. En Henry's hair growed out thicker dan eber, en it 'peared ter git younger en younger, en suppler en suppler, en seein' ez he wuz short er hands dat spring, havin' tuk in considerable new groun', Mars Dugal' 'cluded he wouldn' sell Henry till he git de crap in en de cotton chop', so he kep' Henry on de plantation. But 'long 'bout time fer de grapes ter come on de scuppernum vimes, dey 'peared ter come a change ober 'em. De leaves withered en swivel up, en de young grapes turn yeller, en bimeby eve'ybody on de plantation could see dat de whole vimya'd wuz dyin'. Mars Dugal' tuk en watered de vimes en done all he could, but it wa'n't no use. Dat Yankee had done bust de watermelon. One time de vines picked up a bit, en Mars Dugal' 'lowed dey wuz gwine come out ag'in, but dat Yankee done dug too close under de roots, en pruned de branches too close ter de vime, en all dat lime en ashes done burnt de life out'n de vimes, en dey des keep a witherin' en a swivelin'. All dis time de goopher wuz a workin'. W'en de vimes sta'ted ter wither, Henry 'mence' ter complain er his rheumatiz, en w'en de leaves begin ter dry up, his hair 'mence' ter drap out. W'en de vimes fresh up a bit, Henry'd git peart ag'in, en w'en de vimes withered ag'in, Henry'd git ole ag'in, and just kept getting mo' and mo' fitting for nothing. He just pined away and finally took to his cabin, and when the big vine, where he got the sap to 'noint his head, withered and turned yeller and died, Henry died too, just went out sort of like a candle. Dey didn't appear to be nothin' matter wid him, 'cep'n the rheumatiz, but his strength just dwindled away till he didn't have enough left to draw his breath. The goopher had got on the boat, and throwed Henry dat time for good and all. Mars Dugal took on might'ly 'bout losin' his vimes and his nigger in the same year, and he swore dat ef he could get holt of dat Yankee, he'd wear him to a frazzle, and den chaw up de frazzle. And he done it, too, for Mars Dugal's a monst'us brash man w'en he once git started. He sot de vimya'd out ober agin, but it was 3–4 year befo' de vimes got ter bearin' any scuppernon's. W'en de wah broke out, Mars Dugal raise' a company and went off ter fight de Yankees. He say he was mighty glad dat wah come, and he does wanter kill a Yankee fer eve'y dollar he los' 'long er dat grape raisin' Yankee, and I 'spec' he would 'a' done it, too, ef de Yankees hadn't 'spicioned somethin' and killed him fus'. Atter de surrender, ole Miss moved ter town, de niggers all scattered away from de plantation, and de vimya'd ain' be'n cultivated sence." "Is that story true?" asked Annie doubtfully, but seriously, as the old man concluded his narrative. "It's des ez true ez I'm a settin' here, miss. Dere's a easy way ter prove it. I kin lead de way right ter Henry's grave ober yonder in de plantation buryin' groun'. En I'll tell you what, massa, I wouldn' 'vise you ter buy dis yer ole vimya'd, 'ca'se de goopher's on it yit, en dey ain' no tellin' w'en it's gwine ter crap out. But I thought you said all the old vines died." "Dey did 'pear ter die, but a few of 'em come out ag'in, en is mixed in 'mongst de others. I ain't scared ter eat de grapes, 'ca'se I knows de ole vimes from de new ones, but wid strangers dey ain' no tellin' w'at mought happen. I wouldn' 'vise you ter buy dis vimya'd." I bought the vineyard, nevertheless, and it has been for a long time in a thriving condition, and is often referred to by the local press as a striking illustration of the opportunities open to Northern capital in the development of Southern industries. The luscious scuppernong holds first rank among our grapes, though we cultivate a great many other varieties, and our income from grapes packed and shipped to the Northern markets is quite considerable. I have not noticed any developments of the goopher in the vineyard, although I have a mild suspicion that our colored assistants do not suffer from want of grapes during the season. I found when I bought the vineyard that Uncle Julius had occupied a cabin on the place for many years, and derived a respectable revenue from the product of the neglected grapevines. This doubtless accounted for his advice to me not to buy the vineyard, though whether it inspired the goopher story I am unable to state. I believe, however, that the wages I paid him for his services as coachman, for I gave him employment in that capacity, were more than an equivalent for anything he lost by the sale of the vineyard. End of the Goophered Grapevine. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista.